The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered to the concrete floor of my garage. Not because I was clumsy, heck, I'd been fixing engines since I was 12, but because my 17-year-old daughter Ellie's voice cut through the evening air like a rusty blade. God, Dad, you're so pathetic. Mom deserves better than this dump. I wiped my hands on the oil-stained rag hanging from my belt and looked up from the Mustang's engine bay. Ellie stood in the doorway between the garage and our kitchen, her phone glued to her ear like it had been surgically attached. Her perfectly straightened blonde hair, courtesy of her mother's expensive salon visits, caught the fluorescent light. Yeah, I know, right? She's finally getting what she deserves. Ellie continued into her phone, not bothering to lower her voice. About time someone appreciated her. The words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I kept my expression neutral. 22 years of marriage to Stephanie had taught me to hide my reactions. In Milltown, showing weakness was like leaking vulnerability in shark-infested waters. Ellie, dinner's ready, I called out, forcing my voice to stay level. She rolled her eyes, a gesture she'd perfected somewhere between middle school and her current reign as social media princess of Milltown High. Whatever, Dad, I'm going to Chloe's. The door slammed, leaving me alone with the Mustang and a growing knot in my stomach. I picked up the wrench and tried to focus on the engine. But Ellie's words kept echoing. She's finally getting what she deserves. What the heck did that mean? I'd been married to Steph since we were both young and stupid. Back then, she was Stephanie Miller, the ambitious paralegal who thought my garage had potential. Now she was Stephanie Parker, the polished professional who worked for the flashiest law firm in town and treated our house like a pit stop between her real life. The kitchen door opened again and I heard the click of her heels on the concrete. Designer heels, of course. Everything about Steph was designer these days. Jack, we need to talk. I looked up from the engine. Steph stood there in her perfectly pressed navy suit, her dark hair pulled back in that severe bun she wore to look more professional. At 38, she was still beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that came with a price tag. Salon treatments, expensive makeup, clothes that cost more than most people made in a week. What about? I asked, though something in her tone made my skin crawl. I'm going to yoga class. I'll be late tonight. Yoga class, right. Steph had been going to a lot of yoga classes lately. Funny thing was, she never seemed any more flexible. Which studio? I asked casually, turning back to the engine. The new one downtown, you wouldn't know it. Of course I wouldn't. According to Steph, there was a lot I wouldn't know about. I was just the guy who fixed cars and paid the mortgage on our increasingly expensive lifestyle. Have fun, I said. She hesitated for a moment, like she wanted to say something else. Then her phone buzzed, and her face lit up in a way it hadn't when she looked at me in years. I will, she said, already reading her text message as she walked away. I waited until I heard her car pull out of the driveway before I set down my tools and really thought about what was happening. Ellie's comment, Steph's sudden interest in yoga, the way she'd been dressing up for her Friday night classes, it all added up to something I didn't want to believe. But I wasn't stupid. 22 years of marriage might have made me complacent, but it hadn't made me blind. I walked into the kitchen and grabbed a beer from the fridge. Our house wasn't much, a 3-bedroom ranch in the older part of Milltown, but it was paid for, and it was mine. The kitchen still had the same avocado green appliances we'd bought when we first moved in, and the linoleum was cracked in places, but it was home. Or it had been, until recently. I opened the beer and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of mail Steph had left there. Bills, mostly, but also a receipt that caught my attention. The Milltown Hotel, dated last Friday. Dinner for 2, plus a room charge. My blood turned to ice water. I dug through the rest of the mail with shaking hands. There it was. Another hotel receipt, this one from 2 weeks ago, and underneath that, a credit card statement showing charges I didn't recognize. Flowers from an upscale florist. Dinner at Romano's, the expensive Italian place downtown. A jewelry store charged for $300. None of it was for me. I sat back in my chair and took a long pull of beer. So this was how it was going to be. 22 years of marriage, and Steph was throwing it away for what? Some smooth-talking lawyer from her office? Some rich client who could afford to take her to fancy restaurants? My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting it to be from Gordy, my best friend who ran the boxing gym downtown. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. Your wife looks beautiful tonight. Thanks for sharing. Attached was a photo of Steph walking into the Milltown Hotel, her arm linked with a man I didn't recognize. He was younger than me, maybe 35, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred with rage. Someone was taunting me. Someone thought this was funny. They had no idea who they were messing with. I forwarded the photo to myself and deleted the original message. Then I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door. If Steph wanted to play games, I was about to change the rules. The Milltown Hotel was a 15-minute drive from our house, long enough for me to think about what I was doing, and short enough that I couldn't talk myself out of it. I parked across the street and waited. At 9:30, Steph's silver Honda pulled into the parking lot. She sat in the car for a few minutes, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror. Then the same man from the photo appeared at her car door, opened it for her, and helped her out like she was some kind of princess. I watched them walk into the hotel together, his hand on the small of her back in a gesture that should have been mine. That's when I knew for certain. My marriage was over, and Steph was the one who'd ended it. But if she thought I was going to roll over and play dead, she was about to learn just how wrong she could be. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my garage, staring at the photo on my phone and planning my next move. By morning, I had a strategy. First, I needed to know who this guy was. That turned out to be easier than I expected. A quick search of the law firm's website showed me all their associates, and there he was. Brad Morrison, real estate attorney, specializing in high-end commercial properties. His bio mentioned his love of fitness and fine dining. Of course it did. Second, I needed proof. The photo was a start, but I needed more. I needed something that would make it impossible for Steph to lie her way out of this. That's where Gordy came in. Gordy Walsh had been my best friend since high school. He'd done 2 tours in Middle East before coming back to Milltown and opening his boxing gym in the old warehouse district. Gordy was the kind of guy you wanted on your side in a fight, and he had skills I needed. I found him at the gym that Saturday morning, working the heavy bag like it owed him money. Sweat poured down his scarred face as he threw combinations that would have dropped most men. "Jack," he said when he saw me. "You look like heck." "Feel worse," I said. "I need a favor." Gordy stopped punching and grabbed a towel. "What kind of favor?" I showed him the photo. His expression darkened as he studied it. "Son of a witch," he muttered. "How long?" "Don't know. Weeks, maybe months." I put the phone away. "I need surveillance equipment. Cameras, audio, the works." "You sure you want to go down this road?" Gordy asked. "Once you have proof, there's no going back." "I'm already past the point of no return," I said. "She's making a fool of me. The whole town probably knows." Gordy nodded slowly. "I've got what you need. Military-grade stuff left over from my security consulting days. But Jack, be careful. When you catch a snake, sometimes it bites." That afternoon, while Steph was at her yoga class, Gordy and I installed micro cameras in her car and a GPS tracker under the bumper. We also set up a camera in the hotel room where she'd been meeting Brad. Gordy had connections from his security work, and the hotel manager owed him a favor. "This feels like too much," I said as we finished the installation. "No such thing as too much when your life's on the line," Gordy replied. "Trust me, you'll want documentation for the divorce proceedings." Divorce. The word hit me like a physical blow. 22 years, and it was going to end in lawyers and paperwork and fighting over who got what. But first, I wanted answers. The answers came sooner than I expected. Monday evening, Steph announced she was going to yoga again. "Don't wait up," she said, not even looking at me as she grabbed her purse. "Have fun." I said, just like always. But this time, I was ready. I watched the GPS tracker on my laptop as her car moved through town. Not to the yoga studio, straight to the Milltown Hotel. The cameras I'd installed activated automatically when she entered the room. What I saw on my laptop screen made my stomach turn. Steph and Brad weren't just having an affair. They were planning my destruction. "He's so stupid," Steph said as she poured champagne into 2 glasses. "He has no idea we've been moving money into the offshore account." "How much more do we need?" Brad asked, loosening his tie. "Another 50,000 should do it. Once we drain the business accounts, we can file for divorce and claim he was hiding assets. My friend Tina will handle the legal work." Brad laughed. "Poor bastard won't know what hit him. 22 years of his pathetic life, and he thinks I'm going to walk away with nothing?" Steph's voice was cold, calculating. "He's about to learn what happens when you underestimate Stephanie Parker." I turned off the laptop before I saw any more. I'd heard enough. They weren't just cheating on me, they were stealing from me. The business I'd built from nothing, the money I'd saved for Ellie's college fund, everything I'd worked for was being systematically looted by my own wife. And they thought I was too stupid to notice. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found what I was looking for. The Milltown Community Facebook page, where everyone in town shared news, gossip, and complaints about everything from potholes to school board meetings. Then I uploaded the video. The post was simple. Thought everyone should know what some people do during their yoga classes. Enjoy the show. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with notifications, comments, shares, private messages. The video was spreading through Milltown like wildfire. At 11:47 p.m., my front door slammed open. Steph stood in the doorway, her face twisted with rage, her perfect hair disheveled. "You son of a witch!" she screamed. "How could you do this to me?" I looked up from my beer, keeping my expression calm. "Do what? Share your yoga routine with the community? I thought you'd be proud of your flexibility. You ruined my life, my career, everything." "No," I said, standing up slowly. "You did that yourself. I just made sure everyone could see it." Steph's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "It's my boss." "Better answer it," I said, "though I'm guessing it's not good news." She answered the call, and I could hear the shouting from across the room. When she hung up, tears were streaming down her face. "I'm fired," she whispered. "Probably should have thought of that before you decided to star in your own amateur video," I said. "You don't understand," she said, desperation creeping into her voice. "This will destroy everything. Ellie's reputation, our family." "Our family?" I laughed, and it came out harsh and bitter. "We haven't been a family in years, Steph. You made sure of that." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in her expression. The desperation was replaced by cold calculation. "This isn't over, Jack," she said quietly. "You have no idea what you've started." "Actually," I said, "I think I do, and I'm looking forward to finishing it." After she left, I sat back down and opened another beer. My phone was still buzzing with notifications from the Facebook post. The whole town was talking about Stephanie Parker and her yoga instructor. But something in her final threat bothered me. She'd sounded too confident for someone who'd just been caught red-handed. What did she know that I didn't? The answer came 3 days later, delivered by a process server who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Jack Parker?" he asked, though he clearly knew who I was. "That's me. You've been served." The papers were thick and official-looking, filed by Christina Tina Walsh, attorney at law. As I read through the legal jargon, the picture became clear. Steph was suing me for harassment, invasion of privacy, and emotional distress. She was also filing for divorce and seeking half of everything I owned, plus alimony. But the real kicker was at the bottom of the filing. Tina Walsh wasn't just Steph's lawyer. She was my ex-business partner from 15 years ago. Tina and I had started a small construction company together right after I married Steph. We'd been friends, maybe more than friends if I was being honest. But when the business started failing, I'd bought out her share for pennies on the dollar. It was legal, but it wasn't exactly ethical. She'd lost everything and left town shortly after. Now she was back, and she was coming for me with everything she had. I drove straight to Gordy's gym. I found him in his office, going over the books with a calculator that looked like it had survived several wars. "We've got a problem," I said, tossing the legal papers on his desk. Gordy read through them, his expression growing darker with each page. Tina Walsh. That's a name I haven't heard in a while. You remember her? Hard to forget. She was at Murphy's bar every night for 6 months after you screwed her over, drinking herself stupid and talking about revenge. "I didn't screw her over," I protested. "It was a business deal." Gordy gave me a look that could have melted steel. "Jack, you bought her out for $5,000 when her half was worth 50. Legal doesn't mean right." He was correct, and we both knew it. I'd been desperate to save my marriage and my business, and I'd thrown Tina under the bus to do it. "So what do I do now?" I asked. "You fight back," Gordy said, "but you better be smart about it because Tina Walsh is nobody's fool. She's been planning this for 15 years. That night, I sat in my garage and thought about everything that had happened. Steph's betrayal, Brad's arrogance, Tina's return. It all felt orchestrated like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. They wanted to destroy me. They thought I was just some dumb mechanic who would roll over and take whatever they dished out. They were about to learn how wrong they were. I started with Brad Morrison. His real estate office was in the fancy part of downtown, all glass and chrome and expensive furniture. I waited across the street until I saw him leave for lunch. Then I made my move. Brad drove a BMW. Of course he did. And he parked it in the same spot every day, right in front of Romano's restaurant where he'd been taking my wife. The same restaurant where they'd planned my financial destruction over expensive wine and pasta. I'd brought supplies, spray paint, expanding foam, and a few other items from my garage. It took me less than 10 minutes to transform Brad's pristine BMW into a work of art. Cheater was painted across the hood in bright red letters. The exhaust pipe was filled with expanding foam that would require a complete engine rebuild to fix. And just for fun, I'd superglued a few adult toys to the windshield wipers. But the real masterpiece was the note I left on the windshield. Thought your clients should know what kind of man handles their legal work. Check Facebook for details. Then I uploaded the video of Brad and Steph's hotel room conversation to his business Facebook page, along with screenshots of their text messages about stealing my money. By the time Brad discovered his car, half of Milltown had seen the video. His phone was ringing nonstop, and I could see him through the restaurant window, gesturing frantically as he tried to explain to his business partners what had happened. It was beautiful. But I wasn't done. That evening, I drove to the apartment complex where Brad lived. It was one of those upscale places with a doorman and a gym and all the amenities that impressed women like my wife. I'd done some research and found out Brad was on the third floor, apartment 3B. The building's security was a joke, a simple door lock that any mechanic could bypass in about 30 seconds. I took the elevator to the third floor and let myself into Brad's apartment. The place was exactly what I'd expected. Modern furniture, expensive electronics, and a wine collection that probably cost more than most people's cars. Everything was perfect and pristine, like a showroom. That was about to change. I'd brought a box with me about the size of a shoebox, with air holes punched in the top. Inside were 6 rats I'd caught in my garage using humane traps. They were healthy, well-fed rats, and they were about to have a new home. I released them in Brad's kitchen, then called the building's front desk from Brad's own phone. "This is apartment 3B, I said, disguising my voice. "I'm having a party and it might get a little loud. Just wanted to give you a heads up." Then I turned Brad's stereo up to maximum volume, tuned it to a heavy metal station, and left. The noise complaints started within minutes. By the time the police arrived to check on the disturbance, Brad's apartment was crawling with rats and shaking with music loud enough to wake the dead. Brad got home just as the cops were breaking down his door. I watched from across the street as he tried to explain to the officers that he hadn't been home, that someone had broken in, that this was all some kind of setup. They didn't believe him. The best part was when one of the rats ran across his foot and he screamed like a little girl. Someone in the crowd of onlookers got it on video, and within an hour it was all over social media. Brad Morrison, hotshot real estate attorney, afraid of rats. I drove home feeling better than I had in months. But when I pulled into my driveway, I saw Tina Walsh sitting on my front porch waiting for me. She looked older than I remembered, her blonde hair now streaked with gray, her face lined with years of hard living. But her eyes were the same, cold, calculating, and filled with hate. "Hello, Jack," she said as I got out of my truck. "We need to talk." "I don't think we do," I replied, but I didn't move toward the house. "Oh, but we do." She stood up, and I could see she was holding a thick manila envelope. "You see, I've been watching you for a long time, waiting for the right moment. And when Stephanie came to me 6 months ago, asking for help with her little problem, I knew that moment had arrived." 6 months. They'd been planning this for 6 months. "What do you want, Tina?" She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want you to suffer the way you made me suffer. I want you to lose everything, just like I did. Your business, your house, your daughter's respect, all of it. And if I don't cooperate?" She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photographs. Even in the dim porch light, I could see they showed me breaking into Brad's apartment, vandalizing his car, installing the cameras at the hotel. "Then you go to prison for stalking, breaking and entering, and harassment. Your choice, Jack. Lose everything slowly or lose everything quickly." I stared at the photos, my mind racing. She had me. Tina had been 3 steps ahead from the beginning, and I'd walked right into her trap. "You always were too clever for your own good," I said. "And you always underestimated me," she replied, "just like you're doing now." She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me. "Oh, and Jack, this is just the beginning. By the time I'm done with you, you'll wish you'd treated me better 15 years ago." As I watched her drive away, I realized I was no longer playing defense. Tina Walsh wanted a war, and she was about to get one. But first, I needed to call Gordy. If I was going to survive this, I'd need all the help I could get. Gordy's gym was closed when I arrived, but I knew he'd be there anyway. He lived in the apartment above the gym, and he never really stopped working. I found him in the ring, teaching his nephew Tommy how to throw a proper right cross. "Uncle Gordy, can I hit the heavy bag now?" Tommy asked. He was maybe 10 years old, all elbows and knees and enthusiasm. "In a minute, kid. Go practice your footwork." Gordy climbed out of the ring and walked over to me. "You look like someone just walked over your grave." I told him about Tina's visit and the photographs. Gordy listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "She's got you boxed in," he said when I finished. "But she made one mistake." "What's that?" "She showed you her hand too early. Now you know she's been watching you, which means she's got surveillance equipment of her own. Find that, and you find her weakness." Gordy was right. Tina had been documenting my revenge against Brad, which meant she had cameras somewhere. But where? The answer came to me as I drove home. Mrs. Hanks, my nosy neighbor, had been acting strange lately. She'd always been the neighborhood busybody, but recently she'd been asking too many questions about Steph's schedule and my work hours. I parked in my driveway but didn't go inside. Instead, I walked around to the back of my house and studied Mrs. Hanks's property. Her house sat on a small hill that overlooked my entire yard, including my garage and driveway. There, barely visible in her upstairs window, was the lens of a camera. Mrs. Hanks had been spying on me for Tina. I waited until midnight, then climbed over the fence into Mrs. Hanks' backyard. The old woman was probably asleep, and her house was dark except for the flickering glow of a television in the living room. Getting into her house was even easier than breaking into Brad's apartment. Mrs. Hanks still used the same hiding spot for her spare key that she'd used for 20 years, under the fake rock by her back door. The camera equipment was set up in her spare bedroom, with a clear view of my property. But more importantly, there was a laptop connected to the camera, and the laptop was still logged in. I spent an hour going through Tina's files. What I found made my blood boil. Tina hadn't just been watching me, she'd been orchestrating everything. The anonymous text with Steph's photo, the timing of the legal papers, even Brad's relationship with my wife. It was all part of her plan. But the most damaging discovery was a folder labeled Insurance. Inside were audio recordings of conversations between Tina and Steph, planning my destruction in detail. They discussed how to hide assets, how to manipulate Ellie against me, and how to make sure I ended up with nothing. In one recording, Tina's voice was crystal clear. "The beauty of this plan is that Jack will destroy himself. We just have to give him enough rope to hang himself with, and his own anger will do the rest." I copied everything to a flash drive, then deleted the original files from the laptop. Let Tina wonder what happened to her insurance policy. But I wasn't done with Mrs. Hanks. I disconnected her camera and took it with me, leaving a note in its place. "Thanks for the surveillance footage. Your neighbors will find it very interesting. JP." Then I went home and uploaded every piece of evidence to a private cloud storage account. If Tina wanted to play dirty, I'd show her what dirty really looked like. The next morning, I printed copies of the most damaging audio transcripts and left them in the mailboxes of every house on my street. By noon, the whole neighborhood knew that Mrs. Hanks had been spying on them for months, and that Stephanie Parker had been planning to destroy her husband with the help of a vindictive lawyer. The reaction was swift and brutal. Mrs. Hanks found herself ostracized by women who had been her friends for decades. Her phone rang constantly, with angry neighbors demanding explanations. Someone even threw eggs at her house. But the real victory came when Ellie showed up at my garage that afternoon. "Dad, is this stuff true?" she asked, holding one of the transcripts. Her face was pale, and for the first time in months, she looked like the little girl I remembered instead of the social media princess she'd become. "What do you think?" I asked. She read through the transcript again, focusing on the parts where Steph and Tina discussed using her as a tool against me. Mom said you were trying to turn me against her. I never said a word against your mother, Ellie. Not once. But she said, Ellie's voice trailed off as the truth sank in. She's been lying to me. Your mother's been lying to all of us. Ellie sat down on my workbench looking lost. What happens now? Now we fight back, I said. But I need to know, are you with me or against me? She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw her mother's intelligence in her eyes. But I also saw something else, loyalty and love and a determination I hadn't seen before. I'm with you, Dad, whatever it takes. That evening, Tina called my cell phone. Her voice was tight with controlled rage. You broke into Mrs. Hanks' house. Prove it, I said. This isn't a game, Jack. You're playing with forces you don't understand. Actually, I think I understand perfectly. You've been planning this revenge for 15 years, and you thought you could use my cheating wife to destroy me. How's that working out for you? There was a long pause. Then, you have no idea what I'm capable of. Sure I do. You're capable of manipulating a lonely old woman into spying on her neighbors. You're capable of convincing a cheating wife that she deserves half of everything her husband built. But you know what you're not capable of, Tina? What? You're not capable of beating me? Because you're still the same person who ran away 15 years ago instead of fighting for what she believed in. You're a coward, and cowards always lose in the end. I hung up before she could respond, but I knew this wasn't over. Tina Walsh had spent 15 years planning her revenge, and she wasn't going to give up just because I'd outmaneuvered her once. The real battle was just beginning. The community center was packed for the annual Milltown Fall Festival. It was the kind of event that brought out everyone in town. Families with kids, elderly couples, teenagers looking for something to do on a Saturday night. The perfect audience for what I had planned. I'd spent a week preparing for this moment. The audio recordings from Tina's files had been edited into a highlight reel of betrayal and manipulation. The video evidence of Steph and Brad's affair was ready to go. And most importantly, I'd discovered Tina's biggest secret. She wasn't just my ex-business partner seeking revenge. She was also Brad Morrison's business partner in a real estate development scheme that involved buying up property in Milltown's historic district and tearing it down for luxury condos. Property that included the community center where we were all gathered. The irony was delicious. I'd set up a booth near the main stage, ostensibly selling raffle tickets for the volunteer fire department. But my real purpose was to watch and wait for the right moment. That moment came when Mayor Henderson took the microphone to thank the evening's sponsors. Steph and Brad were sitting at the VIP table near the front, trying to look respectable, despite everything that had happened. Tina sat with them, wearing an expensive suit and a confident smile. They thought they'd won. Steph had filed for divorce and was demanding half of everything. Brad had bounced back from the rat incident and was spinning it as a prank by jealous competitors. And Tina was preparing to represent both of them in court, where she planned to finish what she'd started 15 years ago. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me again. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I said, walking up to the microphone, as Mayor Henderson stepped aside, I think everyone should know what some of our prominent citizens have been up to. The crowd murmured with curiosity. Steph's face went white. Brad started to stand up, but Gordy appeared behind him and put a heavy hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to sit back down. You see, I continued, my wife Stephanie has been having an affair with attorney Brad Morrison. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that they've been planning to steal my life savings and destroy my business as part of an elaborate revenge scheme orchestrated by their lawyer, Christina Walsh. I nodded to Ellie, who was operating the community center's audio-visual system. The first recording began to play through the speakers, Steph's voice crystal clear, talking about draining my business accounts. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. But wait, there's more, I said as the recording ended. Ms. Walsh isn't just seeking revenge against me. She's also planning to destroy this community center and build luxury condos in its place. She's been buying up historic properties all over town using shell companies and fraudulent loan applications. This time, it was Tina's voice that filled the room, recorded during a phone call with a contractor about demolition schedules and bribing city inspectors. The crowd's silence turned to angry murmurs. The community center was beloved in Milltown, a gathering place that had hosted everything from high school graduations to wedding receptions for 3 generations. Now I know what you're thinking, I continued, warming to my theme. This all sounds pretty bad. But surely these are good people who just made some mistakes, right? Let me show you exactly what kind of people they are. Ellie started the video feed. The hotel room footage played on the large screen behind me, showing Steph and Brad in their most private moments. But more damaging were the audio clips of them laughing about my stupidity and planning my financial destruction. The crowd was no longer murmuring. They were angry and getting angrier by the second. So here's what I propose, I said, raising my voice over the noise. Instead of letting these three destroy our community, why don't we show them what Milltown thinks of liars, cheaters, and thieves? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Someone in the back shouted, "Get them out of here!" Others took up the chant. Within seconds, the entire crowd was on their feet, pointing at Steph, Brad, and Tina. Brad tried to make a run for it, but he didn't get far. Someone had parked their truck behind his BMW, blocking him in. As he stood there, arguing with the truck's owner, a group of teenagers surrounded his car and began decorating it with the contents of their sodas and snacks. Steph tried a different approach, walking up to the microphone and attempting to explain herself. "Jack is a disturbed man who's been stalking and harassing me," she said, but her voice was shaking and unconvincing. "Is that so?" I asked, taking the microphone back. "Then explain this." The final recording played, a conversation between Steph and Tina from just 2 days earlier, where they discussed how to have me committed to a mental health facility so they could take control of my assets. That was the last straw. The crowd surged forward, and Steph barely made it to her car before someone threw a handful of mud at her windshield. But Tina Walsh wasn't giving up so easily. "You think you've won?" she shouted over the noise of the crowd. "You have no idea what's coming for you, Jack Parker. This isn't over." "Actually," I said, "it is." I nodded to Gordy, who had been waiting by the community center's entrance. He opened the door, and in walked Detective Ray Kowalski from the state police, along with 2 FBI agents. "Christina Walsh," Detective Kowalski announced, "you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud." The crowd fell silent as they watched Tina being handcuffed. Her confident expression crumbled as she realized that all her careful planning had been for nothing. "How?" she whispered as the agents led her past me. "You should have done your homework," I said. "Gordy's security consulting business has some very interesting government contracts. When I showed him your real estate scheme, he knew exactly who to call." As the police cars drove away with Tina in custody, the crowd began to disperse. Some people stopped to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Others just stared, probably wondering what other secrets their neighbors might be hiding. Steph approached me one last time as I was packing up my booth. "Jack, please," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We can work this out. I made mistakes, but we can fix this." I looked at her for a long moment, remembering the woman I'd married 22 years ago. She was still beautiful, still the same person I'd fallen in love with. But she was also the person who'd betrayed me, stolen from me, and tried to destroy me. "No, Steph," I said quietly. "We can't fix this. Some things, once they're broken, can't be repaired." She stared at me, and I saw the exact moment when she realized I meant it. The tears stopped, and her expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "You'll regret this," she said. "When you're old and alone, you'll remember what you threw away." "Maybe," I said, "but I'll also remember what you threw away first." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. I watched her get into her car and drive out of my life forever. Ellie appeared at my side as Steph's taillights disappeared around the corner. "Are you okay, Dad?" she asked. I put my arm around her shoulders and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." The next morning, I sat in my garage with a cup of coffee and the local newspaper. The front page headline read, "Local attorney arrested in real estate fraud scheme." Below that was a smaller story. Milltown couple's messy divorce plays out at fall festival. I was famous in a way. The whole town knew my business, knew that my wife had cheated on me and tried to steal everything I'd worked for. 6 months ago, that would have humiliated me. Now it just felt like freedom. My phone rang. It was a potential customer who'd seen my garage featured in the newspaper story and wanted me to work on his classic Camaro. After him, 3 more people called with similar requests. Apparently, being the guy who'd outsmarted a crooked lawyer and exposed a real estate fraud was good for business. By noon, I had more work lined up than I could handle in 6 months. By evening, I'd hired 2 part-time mechanics to help with the overflow. Ellie came home from school that afternoon with a smile on her face for the first time in months. "Everyone's talking about what you did," she said. "Sarah Chen's mom said you're a hero for saving the community center." "I'm not a hero," I said. "I'm just a guy who got tired of being pushed around. Same thing, isn't it?" Maybe she was right. Maybe standing up for yourself, fighting back when someone tries to destroy you, was a kind of heroism. Or maybe I was just a mechanic who'd gotten lucky. Either way, I was still standing when the dust settled and my enemies weren't. That evening, Gordy stopped by with a 6-pack of beer and a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "You magnificent bastard," he said, handing me a bottle. "I can't believe you pulled it off." "We pulled it off," I corrected. "I couldn't have done it without you." "So, what's next?" he asked. "Thinking about getting back into the dating scene?" I laughed and took a long drink of beer. "Not for a while. I've got a business to run and a daughter to raise. That's enough excitement for now." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun set over Milltown. It was a small town, full of small people with small problems. But it was my town, and these were my people, and I'd fought to protect both. Somewhere out there, Stephanie was probably planning her next move, figuring out how to rebuild her life after losing everything. Brad Morrison was dealing with the fallout from his association with Tina's fraud scheme. And Tina Walsh was sitting in a federal holding cell, finally paying for 15 years of planning and hatred. But none of that was my problem anymore. I'd been called a villain, a stalker, a disturbed man seeking revenge. Maybe all of those things were true. Maybe I had become the villain in my own story. But if being the villain meant protecting what was mine, standing up for what was right, and refusing to let anyone destroy me without a fight, then I was proud to wear that label. After all, sometimes the villain is the only one willing to do what needs to be done. And sometimes the villain is the only one who wins.